Hi guys, I just kind of wanted to make a video here from the heart, and I've noticed with a lot of my videos it takes me a while to get an article up and to look it up, and it takes a bit of time out of the video. And I notice people probably click off then, and they probably think, "Oh, what's he doing now?" And he's wasting time, and sometimes it doesn't load for me. So what I'm gonna do in this is different. I'm just gonna speak from the heart, and I'm just gonna talk about something which I think has been discussed by other YouTube channels, but I feel like I want to give my own personal take on it, And what I'm going to say in this video is best to worst jobs for autistic men. So the reason I'm doing that is because it's for men and it's for autistic people. And I can't speak as an autistic woman. I can't speak as a woman, full stop. And I can't speak as a neurotypical person. I can only give my own personal account of what's happened with me. And I hope you enjoy it. I've seen a few autistic channels do it, and I feel like it's a very interesting topic. And I kind of wanted to weigh in on this. So I have talked about autism and employment before, and you can check that out in my videos under those titles. If you scroll back through my videos, I know there's a lot there, but you can actually look it up and you can see. Before that, I'm going to have a sip of my electrolytes. It's not piss, I promise. It's strawberry and guarana. Guarana. I feel like that's the better way to say it. It sounds kind of Portuguese or Spanish. Guarana. I know comparing the two is not good, but some words do sound similar. It actually sounds more Portuguese. Um, and I worked with a Portuguese guy and a Spanish fella as well. And it's funny because they say como estás, but in Portuguese it's como estás. I'm not probably not pronouncing that 100% accurately, but it's funny. It's real como estás, tudo bem. That's what they say as well. But as I always do, I'm getting sidetracked talking about electrolytes and then. So yeah, let's go into it. Let's talk about best to worst jobs for autistic men because I feel like there'll be a difference. I've worked in a lot of different jobs, and one thing I see time and time again is that autistic people can't seem to stick in a job for any length of time. And I don't think it's through lack of trying. I just feel like we don't get stimulated by it and we lose interest very easily. Um, because we don't see the point. I don't feel like it's us. I feel like the jobs are toxic and neurotypical people are prepared to stick them out longer than we are, and not always the case. I've seen a lot of people complain and say, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. Whereas I've always tended to be more, no, I'm here to do the job, so I'm going to do the job to the best of my ability. That's kind of how I see it. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the context I want to give behind it. I feel like we're always made out to be difficult, or the diversity hire is what we're looked at. Here's the diversity hire to make the company look good, but they don't really care about autism, and that's the God's honest truth. um and I've seen that time and time again. There's been a few jobs now where I haven't actually told people I'm autistic purely because I didn't get the vibe that it was a safe space to do that. And then other jobs I have told people that I'm autistic and it made fuck all difference. They basically just then put the problem back on me and said, "Don't take this personally. When I say this to you, you need to then not take it personally." And I kind of thought about that. I was like, "That's not you changing your ways. That's you putting the problem onto me." Do you know what I mean? And a lot of employers are very slow to actually deal with it because you're the different one. You're the one with a difference, not them. And unless you're more obviously handicapped, let's say, the employer's not going to do anything about it, because if someone sees a clearly disabled employer or employees are being targeted by someone, that's going to cause upset, and that seems to be what the company actually care about. If the person is visibly handicapped or disabled and someone actually does something and says something nasty to them, people only care how they are perceived, and that's a really sad state of affairs. And I've seen it, because I made people perfectly aware that I'm autistic. And because I don't come across that way, I'm seen as fair game. And I do get that slagging happens in the workplace, or banter, but I feel like that can be used as a weapon against autistic people as well, because we are more naive to it and we don't pick up on it as easily. We're easier targets, 100%. And a lot of things can be played off as just banter, just slagging. Oh, here, you need to grow a thicker skin, you need to be able to take a slagging. You're too fucking sensitive. Do you ever cop on, grow a thicker skin, be a man, all this stuff. And it's not just men that do that. A lot of women do it. A lot of women in the workplace can be very nasty. And then if you tell them to do anything, they go, I'm not doing that. And then if you insist on them doing something, actually call them out, they claim you're harassing or bullying them, which it's much easier for a woman to do than a man. It just is. What I tend to see more with toxic behaviour from men in the workplace is usually when they have a position of authority over you and they try and impress women. They're trying to be Billy Big Bollocks and put you down and put you in your place, to make themselves look good or to boost their own fragile ego. They love lording over you. Getting hay fever, it's hard to breathe sometimes, it's annoying, but I'm also tapering off mirtazapine, so bear with me if I need to take a few deep breaths in between. It's just catching myself and um, making sure that I'm okay for the video. But with all that said, the context I want to give behind it is just because some environments are going to have more women, some environments are going to have more men. It's just the way it is, and I've experienced both, and I've experienced both extreme toxicities, the really toxic environments. Um, but I've also experienced jobs where I kind of thrive, and I flourish. I find it harder to say no to an employer if they ask me to do something. And I feel like that's the piece of advice I should really nail down with autistic people is have boundaries. Say, this is what I'm hired to do. This is what I'm doing. I'm not paid to do this. I wasn't trained to do this. So I'm not doing it. It's much easier to say in hindsight, much easier when you're in the shit, and you're asked to do something and you might be letting somebody else down. It's definitely harder to say no. But I see time and time again, autistic people pleasing. That seems to go hand in hand with autism, or the higher functioning, if you will. If you're capable of going off to work, then you're not entitled to any sort of sympathy, and I do see a lot of fakeness, a lot of pretending people care about autism, but they don't really. When push comes to shove, and autistic people are telling the employer, here's what I need, I want to do the job, I want to do it well, but you're not giving me what I need to succeed, and they don't care. A lot of things set up for autistic people are not set up by autistic people, and therefore the people who are doing it don't actually understand. And I have no doubt that some of them, and most people, probably have the best intentions, but a lot of these things are just set up to look good, or a word that my man loves to use, lip service. Basically, what it means is, oh, yes, we support autism, to look good. And as I was talking about, if you have an employee with autism who's clearly autistic, like they might have a few obvious tics or they're slower to work. And if a customer sees that person being picked on by a member of staff, I imagine they wouldn't be too happy about it. And if they made a complaint to that company, the employer would think, shit, I better do something about this, or this comes back on me, rather than, oh my God, that's terrible. How dare the person pick on an autistic employee? That's unfortunately the way I've seen it work. A lot of times they don't actually care about the fact that there's an autistic person who's vulnerable, getting used and abused. All they care about is this is going to come back on the company and it's going to make us look very bad and it's going to be bad for publicity. Which is very unfortunate, but that's where a lot of people actually care. That they care more about reputation than the person who was vulnerable getting picked on, from what I've seen. So I've worked in retail and I've worked in a clothes shop, and um, that environment is very clicky, and I think that retail, for many reasons, and I've seen many autistic people say that they hated working in retail and it was toxic. Um, and I think the reason for that is because you're dealing with a lot of people who are very superficial, and especially the sports shop that I worked in. It was basically known as a shop for drug dealers to buy their Armani and their Gucci. All the managers I had, a lot of them anyway, if they weren't fat and seriously overweight, they were on steroids. They had the turkey teeth done. You kind of get the picture, the lads who go off to Ibiza and have that square type of haircut, the ones who get their teeth done, who get the looks maximally clavicular, their jaw broken and reset. One of my managers was actually selling steroids online. So that's the kind of people you're dealing with. A lot of them were drug dealers as well. A lot of them got jobs because they were drug dealers. And if the guards asked, well, where are you getting all this money for? They'd say, here's my income. I'm getting an income from the shop. Now, obviously, someone working in a sports shop isn't going to get a massive salary, but they could say, this is the money I'm making. So what I got to see was a lot of people who were real superficial. They were also drug dealers. They weren't the best kinds of people anyway. Not the kind of environment where you're going to open up to people and say, "Oh, I'm autistic," And then there was a lot of good-looking girls who no one would say boo to, and managers, male managers, a lot of cases would give preferential treatment to because they were good-looking, and the managers wanted to look good in front of them. I had a lot of managers that were very creepy as well. And just to give you an example of that, this fellow was a nut job, and he was eventually caught. He robbed over 7 grand worth of clothes from this shop. So nice guy. He was quite funny actually, but he's a bit of a pervert. So I was at a folding table, so you'd have a fitting room, and then you'd be looking after the fitting room, but then folding clothes, which I'll get into because that was challenging for me because of my autism, I believe, and I'll say that in a second. So this manager tapped me on the shoulder, and there were good looking girls. I was 18. I feel like I'm defending myself in court, but I was 18 years old. One of the girls was 16, the other was 17. This manager was 35 years old, so twice my age, and definitely over twice their age. And he tapped me on the shoulder and he goes, "Dan, I'm going to go up there and make this a three-way. Don't cock block me." And I was like, I was kind of chuckling and laughing. Was like, that's really creepy. And he was eyeballing them and trying to impress them and talking to them. And as you say, eventually he was caught after robbing 7 grand worth of clothes and merchandise. And the most ironic part about that is when we were leaving the shop, we all had to be checked as staff. So we were actually patted down, not in a very, airport security way, but we had to show our sleeves or our pockets, or if we had any bags, we had to show that and prove that we weren't robbing from the shop. And he was always very, very thorough, cheeky finger in the bum. No, he was very thorough in the way that he would do extra security checks to make sure that you weren't stealing anything. And I found that really ironic that he was the one actually robbing from the shop and just how good the security system was. Just one sec. Eventually they did catch him, so they found out what he was up to, and he was fired and forced to pay I think like a 14 grand fine. So they doubled what he stole and forced him to pay that. So he got his comeuppance in the end. He was also in court for I think smashing a window and pissing in it or something like that. So those are the kinds of people you're working with. And as you say, very superficial. A lot of them. One of my managers just seemed to have it in for me. So he was showing me what to do, and you're learning on the job. You have to train with the people you're training with, and you do whatever they tell you. You don't know the job, they do. And no matter how basic it seems, there's always a right and a wrong way to do it. So I was like, fair enough. So I was doing hangers, so we had different hanger racks that we had to use, and every single hanger on each rack had to be the same. So there were loads of hangers that were in boxes, and I had to take them out and organize them. Not a difficult job, because I've kind of learned to copy people or mimic people. If I'm trying to be obliging, I may repeat myself quite a bit. It's kind of a thing that I have with my autism, which I don't like saying too much with my autism or because of my autism. I don't want it to limit me, but I think it's important for context of the video just to say it. So he was there explaining, "Hey, this is where each hanger goes. Are you with me? Yeah, grand. And then here's where the other hanger goes. Here's where the other one goes. Happy days." And then after he'd say something to me, I'd be like, yeah, sure, no problem. And he go, "Are you with me?" And I go, "Yeah, sure, no bother." And he goes, explain something else. And then I say, yeah, sure. He was like, are you grand with that? And I was like, yeah, sure. And then it might have been a bit repetitive, yeah, but I feel like his reaction was way over the top. I said, yeah, sure, when he asked me to do anything. And he got angry with me for that. And he said, what do you mean? Am I sure? Of course I'm fucking sure. And I said, what? And he goes, why'd you keep asking? Are you sure? And then I was like, I'm not saying that. I was calm and relaxed. I didn't get angry or nothing because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. you know, I said, I'm not asking you, are you sure? What I'm saying is, yeah, sure, no problem. As in, no problem at all, I'll do the job. I was like, what's your problem? And he was like, yeah, sure. And then he walked off. And I could overhear him talking about me, and saying to another lad, well, if that young fella says, yeah, sure, one more time. He didn't say anything else after that, but he was kind of insinuating I'll lose my shit if he says it one more time. He was always on my case. He made me really nervous because he'd always be nitpicking over things. Um, so like the sections we'd get, we'd have to fold them. And even if a customer came over, and let's say we're looking at a tag, and I had to put the tag back in, that wasn't enough. So you could have folded the whole section. So you had women's, kids. There was an Armani section, which the drug dealers loved, of course. but you would have to fold the clothes. So even if someone, as I say, pull the tag out the collar to look at it, the whole section had to be folded again. And I thought that was ridiculous in itself. Obviously, if someone ruffled something and made it look bad, fair enough, or even the whole rack of clothes, fine. But you'd have to do the whole section again. And I was there thinking, wow, this is a waste of time. and it looks exactly the same as it did before. I didn't see any difference. And one time I said, when I was asked like, "Where you done?" I'm like, "I'm nearly done." Yeah. He took that as I'm finished, and he said, "Are you on drugs?" He literally said that to me. I mean, half the shop were on drugs. But he goes, "Are you on drugs?" And I was like, "Why?" And he goes, "You must be on drugs if you think that's done." And I was like, "What?" I didn't know why he was getting so angry over nothing. Um, he also gave out to me before because I stayed in the shop an extra 2 hours more than I was supposed to. Now I got paid for it, but he was there saying, "Oh, are you looking for extra hours?" Or and I was kind of going, "No, why? The rule was that you weren't allowed to have your phone out on the floor. So if the phone rang, you'd get in trouble. So I left my phone in the office, so I wasn't checking it, and there was no clock or nothing for you to check the time. So if you asked someone, you'd be like, "All right, I'm off shift, and I'm done." Someone did get in trouble for actually looking at the phone. So I was there thinking, all right, we're not allowed to have the phone out. But I was kind of asked, was I looking for extra hours or whatever? And they were like, look, if you want extra hours, we can give you extra hours, which I did do. And I got good pay for it. So I was like, happy days. I'm sorted. Um, but I just started losing interest in that job slowly but surely. The same manager who I had trouble with, he didn't create an environment where I felt comfortable asking him any questions. I felt like if I asked him a question, he'd bite my head off over it. And he asked me to do a bin run before, and I didn't know where I was actually going or what I had to do. And I started panicking, and it was a disaster. Put it like that. And I had a bit of a panic attack doing it. And he was actually quite sympathetic in that regard. He actually went, look, mate, you need to just calm the fuck down, do the job right. You're still on probation. So I have no issue if you're anxious or nervous or whatever, just come to me and ask me something. And I was like, all right, fair enough. So that was kind of on me. I should have probably gone and asked, but he didn't create a space where I felt comfortable doing that. And I could hear him talking about me behind my back a few times. I couldn't prove it all the time, but I knew he was saying stuff about me behind my back. I could hear him say something like that lad's getting kept on, kind of in an ironic way, kind of going, he's Christmas staff, he's getting kept on. I don't know why, basically bad mouthing me saying, how was that fool getting kept on? He didn't say that, but it was kind of, he's getting kept on, what? And then, like, one time I did have a go at him, so there were lots of times where I just got on with my job and didn't say anything back, and it was like fair enough. Um, but then like one time, just one sec there, pause it. Sorry about that. Judy called. Alfie wanted to play, so outside I went. But yeah, I just want to kind of get back to it. So I want to stay on topic more in videos. I know I tend to ramble, so I will stay on topic as best I can. But just talking about that manager, we did actually have an argument before because our toilets used to be a disgrace in the our work toilets, like the staff ones that we used. Um, Basically, men and women were using it, and both are just as bad as each other, and women are worse. And I say that as someone who's cleaned public bathrooms. My poor brother has done it more than me. He will testify to that. They are a disgrace. And we have this bias, like we think that men are much more filthy than women. And I thought that, I was guilty of thinking this, but we got a very rude awakening as to the truth. But anyway, the point I'm getting at here is that people used to leave it in an awful state and nothing was ever said, or at least it wasn't done to the same extreme. They were never called out in the middle of the shop, I went in and did what I had to do. There was no hand dryer, so I was washing my hands as you do. Um, no hand dryer, so I had to dry my hands with toilet paper, which meant that a bit of water dripped onto the seat because I had the lid up, and then I was drying them off, and I wanted to kind of drip the water into the toilet, so that I didn't get it all over the place. So I was trying, but it was this shitty toilet, not shitty toilet paper, rubbing shit all over my hands. No, the really thin toilet paper that breaks, and when you're wiping, it's very risky, if you know what I mean. But I got a few drops of water on the seat, on the lid, and I missed them when I was wiping them off. I didn't really want to touch that toilet seat to begin with. He comes out and he screams at me and he goes, "Do you know how to use a fucking toilet seat?" Like, you pissed all over the seat, and he was giving out to me and giving me big smacks and all. He was really having a go at me and saying, "Come here, you pissed all over the seat. Like, do you know how to use a fucking toilet?" And really condescending towards me. And I said, "I fucking didn't." And then he was like, "Yeah, you did." And I was like, "I fucking didn't. I'll show you now. Let's go in and have a look." I was like, "Are you spying on me?" Loads of people leave that place in a way worse state, and you never say anything to them. And he was like, "Go on then, go in and show me." And I showed him, like I went in and it was fine. There were a few droplets of water, if even on it. And I said to him, "See, I fucking told you." And he started kind of going, "Why didn't you just say it to me in the first place that it wasn't you?" And I was like, "I fucking did." And he goes, "All right, calm down," kind of playing the victim then. Um, or at least making out that I was the aggressor. And I was like, "We don't just start accusing someone of doing something and embarrass them in front of the whole shop." Like, give me a fucking break. You're always on my case. And this is after hearing him talking about me behind my back. People being very clicky, just not feeling like I'm getting any job satisfaction, and just feeling like he has it in for me. Feeling like he's always looking for a little way to have a dig at me. You know. But then there was also another job, so I liked folding clothes and being at the fitting room, but there was a bit of a ridiculous rule in this shop, right? So if you had any sort of bag, we had to take it. So you're asking women to hand over their handbags and everything, which have a lot of personal belongings in it, and important documents, maybe whatever people carry in their handbags. Um, but their personal belongings were in the handbag, and you can't bring them all in with you. So obviously, people weren't too happy when you were asking for all their bags. At this point, like I was young and didn't have nearly as much confidence as I have now. I felt very awkward asking them. I was kind of there feeling like, oh, if it were me, I wouldn't do it. I'd say, "No, I'm not giving you my fucking bag," because you had to put them under a little tiny desk, and then you had to take tags off the room. So you had to put a tag that had the number of items. So people weren't allowed to bring in any more than 4 items with them at one time. So you had to put a tag on with the number of items that they were bringing in with them. And the way that worked was it was kind of fair actually. I understood that system because that meant four items were brought in, four items should be brought back out, you know. And you were kind of keeping an eye on them. And if they wanted to then purchase the items, you would get them ready for them and then you bring it up to the till. Otherwise, it had to be returned. They'd give them to you. You know, they weren't brought back because if you leave it to somebody else to bring them back, they could do anything with them. But the problem was no more than one person was allowed in the fitting room at one time, and you're having to fold clothes. So if you focused on only policing the fitting room, and you've got bags with just this is where it really fucked up my autism. Multitasking is not something I do very well. What I'm very good at is having one task and focusing solely on that. I will do that perfectly, you know, and I'm very good at that. And I feel like that is something autistic people tend to be good at, you know. Generally, what I find is that autistic people, male or female, or whatever you want to identify as, we do not function well when multitasking um, because we get distracted. We're not giving our full attention to one task, and that really fucks us up. And that's not just me. A lot of autistic people seem to agree with that. I haven't met one autistic person that says they prefer multitasking to being given one task and just going at that. And as I say, I was quite lacking in confidence at this stage. Like I'm still not there now, but I was trying to fold the clothes, do it very neatly. I was focusing on the process of folding the clothes. I was trying to make sure nobody stole anything from underneath my feet because you had to ask for people's fucking handbags. And some people were complying, others weren't. Sometimes I was like, this is ridiculous. And some women even said to me, look, I'm sorry, it's just I'm not comfortable handing it over because I've got my purse, I've got bank cards, I've got everything in there, I've got pictures of my kids. I'll hand over all the shopping bags to you, no problem, like from other shops. And I was kind of like, yeah, you know what, it's fine. Like, I felt like it was kind of ridiculous to ask people to hand over all their personal belongings to me, one person who was preoccupied with folding. And then you had to make sure that there were stuff hung up. So you'd fold them, you'd hang them up on the rails, and then they'd be brought back out by members of staff who weren't in the fitting room. I would say to them, we've got all this stuff ready. Can you please take it out and put it on the shop? That was the clothes that people would bring back. So I'd fold them up, make them neat so they were presentable, and then they'd go back into the shop. I hope that makes sense. But you would say to people, only one person's allowed in the fitting room at one time. But you get a gang of people coming in, and then one of their mates would be in one fitting room, their other mate would be in another fitting room. And I was looking around saying, lads, it's only one person per room. They would get out of the room. But then when I wasn't looking, because I had to make sure people's stuff wasn't getting stolen, or I was talking to a member of staff, they'd go into the room or they'd come out and say, what do you think? And they'd be talking to each other and I couldn't keep an eye on it. You know, I was struggling to kind of get everything done. Voice is gone for some reason. Take a deep breath. But it really didn't work to my strengths because I'm nervous that people's stuff is going to get robbed, and if it does get robbed, I'm going to be the one that's blamed for that, not that it's scumbag that's robbing it, because I'm the member of staff that asked for their handbag or their bag that had some item that they paid for. So it made me very nervous. You know, I was always panicking that if I take my eye off the ball, someone will try and steal something. And people, there was a really stupid system. You know, I just felt like, what is the point in having this? This is a recipe for disaster. So there was a big triangular shaped mirror, right? And on the top of that mirror, there was a big hole. So I actually have something. It's a lot of thumbtacks, but say if the lid was off that, the mirror was actually, we've got a stack here. So we've got some office supplies. So say if that was the mirror, right, but there was a hole in the top like that, and you could very easily just reach in, pop the tags down, and then walk out. So what it looked like to me was they had the same number of items with them, and they would tell me that they were going to purchase the item, and they'd rip the tag off it, and then they would go out of the shop, and no one would be any the wiser, and they could just pop the tag down the top of the mirror, and so the alarm wouldn't go off. And another stupid rule that we had was we couldn't actually search their bags unless it was a bag from our store. Like, how ridiculous is that? So, if it wasn't actually from the shop, you couldn't search them and you'd be in trouble for that. So that was another thing. I just felt like there was a load of stupid systems set up, like a mirror with a big fucking hole down the triangle of it that people can just pop the tags into. Otherwise we're going to see it happen. We're going to see what they're doing with it because they're going to have to put it somewhere. They're going to have to put it in their pocket, and then someone might see them popping it on the ground or putting it in a bin. We would see that happening. So I was kind of thinking this system was set up to fail pretty much. Um, and then like you'd have a changeover. So sometimes you'd be asked to change to the fitting room and somebody else would already be on the fitting room. We kind of did it, as we went on. So if someone felt more comfortable doing it, sometimes if I needed a breather and we weren't too busy, I just fold the clothes. I found it kind of relaxing, just folding the clothes and doing that. Was much nicer than having to deal with people. Um, but I might not know how many people are in the fitting room, so you might get a rush and you'd be asked to go and do it because a staff member would be newer than I was, so I'd be asked to go on it and police it. And you're not responsible for what's happened, but you are, if that makes sense. So you're not the one who's let loads of people into the fitting room, but it's going to come back on you, because you're the one who's now on the fitting room. So you've got to police it and you're already on the back foot. If I'm going into the fitting room and I'm already sorted, I know what I'm doing. I know where I stand. I know who's in there, who's not, who should be in there, and who shouldn't be. But Alfie's singing. I don't know if you can hear that, but great singer. But yeah, there was a lot wrong with that job, and there was a lot of clickiness and people basically not doing the job right. And I lost all interest in it. I basically felt depressed doing it. I felt miserable. I'd call in sick a lot. Um, Probably didn't do the job to the best of my ability, if I'm being perfectly honest. I just thought it was shit. And I did that as well while I was doing my final year of school. That's when I actually went in. So probably not good timing. But I needed to keep my mind active. I needed something to do. That's just how I am. So that's what I did. Um, yeah, retail is not for a lot of people. I feel like it's soul destroying. The job itself wasn't particularly difficult, but the multitasking, the lack of specificity, and that manager being a dickhead really just got me. I had a mate that worked in footwear, and the fact that he couldn't follow clothes. So when we both went in to do a trial run, because I showed some competence folding clothes, I was actually told to go on textiles, not footwear. And all the people who were shit at folding clothes got to go on footwear. I really got on well with the manager who worked in footwear. I loved him. I thought he was a great guy. And Jacko, if you're watching, I love you. I really liked him. I got on very well with him. And I asked, could I change the footwear? Because he was like, oh, you're doing fine. You're doing really well. Because I had to cover someone one day and I'd no experience in footwear, but it was easy. It was quite easy to do. And he said, oh, we'd love to have you up here. And I was like, well, could I change? And he was like, yeah, put in for a change there and request a change. So I said, yeah, grand, I'd like to do that. But I didn't get it for whatever reason. They said they had enough people or somebody else was going there. For whatever reason, I didn't get it. So I was like, shit. But never mind, I left anyway after a year. And that kind of seems like the cut-off point for me. So just want to kind of stay on the subject of retail. So I also did another job where I worked in a vape shop. And one of the guys I worked with, Steve, the Aussie fella, who was coming on Beats personality disorder. If you haven't looked it up, do. Guy with a big beard and into heavy metal music. Really great guy. Love Steve. How you do? How you going? You fucking can. You shit can. He's from the Blue Mountains and he's a lovely fella. And when I was on with him, I loved being on with him. So we'd work at a vape stand. People would come up to us and like a lot of the vapes look like a pen anyway, so they'd hand it to us and say, "Oh, sorry, what's wrong with it?" We'd usually replace a coil, so we take a coil out like that, clean the thing off, wipe it down, pop in a new coil, and we sometimes do that for free. Other times we charge them. We did a deal, so there were coils that sold quite popularly called flare coils. If anyone vapes, they'll know. and we'd usually do a multi pack of them for a special offer, so people would get them and then they'd leave. Um, Now you could be on the shift on your own. That was the thing, you know. So there was always one day in the week where I'd be on my own, and sometimes the day would drag by. Other times you'd be really busy, but you'd have no one to help you. And one of the girls I worked with was a disaster. I already spoke about her, so I have a lot of sympathy and some partial empathy for people who have borderline personality disorder. But Steve has that fellow I worked with, and he didn't bring his problems into work. You know, he tried his best not to. She didn't. She just would have emotional outbursts, and you'd be the closest one in proximity, so you'd get to see it, and you couldn't escape it even if you wanted to. And if you gave it back to her, then the day would just drag on even more. So you had to be really careful with that one, which wasn't ideal. The actual job itself wasn't that bad. The till was a bit complicated, as a lot of tills are, but I kind of got the handle on it. And some customers would have ridiculous demands, or not even demands, just questions. Like one lad came in, he always paid, no problem, but he asked me could I fix his vape that he dropped. He dropped off a 60-foot scaffold. So I was like, mate, there's no chance in hell I'm going to be able to fix that. You're going to need to get a new vape, I'm afraid. I wish I could help you out, but I can't. And he was like, yeah, fair enough. So he was understanding. He was like, look, it's probably a long shot. Would you be able to fix it? I was like, nah, look, you're going to have to get a new case. So unfortunately, he did. And it was one of the brands that we sold that had a little glass case. I don't know if I should say it just in case I get in trouble, but they broke quite easily, and they were very popular, weirdly enough. But they broke very easily because they had a glass cartridge where you had all the vape liquid. So don't drink that, by the way. Some people are stupid enough to drink it. Vaping is not good for you, and we had to give out these pamphlets that said it's 95% safer than smoking. Did I believe that for a second? No, I fucking didn't. So yeah, you just kind of have them, and if anyone had any questions, you'd be like, "Here you go, take that. That's you covered," you know. And I guess you could say it's morally questionable to work in a vape shop, but say if you work at a news agent that sells cigarettes, you know, you're still killing people technically, but I wouldn't look at it that way. You're paid to sell what people want, and if they want cigarettes, what are you going to say? No, you can't purchase them. You have to, by law, give them the cigarettes. So that's the same thing as working in the vape shop. So anyone who says, "Oh, you know, you're killing people," was like, "Yeah, but it's a vape shop." It was one of the only places I could get a job in because I sent a lot of CVs out for part time work. They were the one place that got back to me. So there was also a number of reasons why I left that job. So we were moving down here to Wexford, so that's why I actually didn't mind it. If it wasn't for that one girl who, you know, she was just a nightmare to work with, I probably would have stayed. I didn't mind it really that much, and the lads that I worked with and the female managers were grand as well. They were a good laugh, you know, very easy going. One of the times was actually the worst time, and because Steve that I worked with, he was a really sound guy, as I say, and I didn't want to get him in trouble, and I could tell there was something not right. He was having a mental health episode. He said he was really sorry, but he was sick, so he couldn't come in for the day. Would I be able to do the shift on my own? I said, yeah, no problem. Sure, I was doing that anyway. But then we got a delivery, and a manager had to sign off on it. And because he was supposed to be in that day, the answer I got when I brought it up in a group chat was, "Oh, sure, can't Steve just do it?" And then I had to say, "Well, he's not actually here at the minute." And the manager had to come all the way over to the square in Tala from Bray. She did, and she was grand. She was very helpful. But before she got over, I had to leave all the stock in the shop next door overnight, which wasn't ideal at all. It's just, it can be difficult dealing with customers, and as I say, you often don't get the training you need. You just have to learn by trial by fire. And so there'd be a lot of customer complaints. I didn't personally vape. I have done before, but I didn't really do it because I knew it was bad for you. And I tried to not smoke too often. I would still smoke, you know, but I thought vaping's not good for you. stay away from it. And I got to see how hooked people were on it too. So I feel like it was a good experience. I also saw more people who were into working out and going to the gym. They kind of thought to themselves that it was healthier to vape. There was a lot of people who vaped that never even touched cigarettes, but they somehow convinced themselves it was healthier. But sometimes I would get confused. I didn't know how to fix a vape, and I was scared about breaking it. So I was there kind of dicking around with it. I didn't know how it would open. They've all got very complicated mechanisms of opening. Some just you can screw the head off. Some you have to lift it up very slightly, then flick it across. Some you just flick them across. So I was there going, it should just push across or the lid should come off. Or why is it not coming off? And I trained, like I literally was told for one of the days to get familiar with them and to get familiar how they worked, how they opened, how you replaced them. And I was there one day with the pliers because some of the vape liquid had gotten on the outside of the device and hardened, and I couldn't get the lid off. And this fellow was standing there for hours. He's literally came back, then he came over to me and he was like, "Can you get the lid off for me?" And I got the lid off for him. And then he couldn't get it back on because the thing was really badly damaged, but he just wouldn't get it into his thick skull that it's because he fucked it up. I was there going, I can get the lid off for you, no problem, but you're going to need to replace it. And he would stand there just waiting. And I was there going, I can't replace it for you. That's the best I can do, unless you want to purchase another one. And then you get angry customers as well, which is always fun. Um, Sometimes they were justified, sometimes they were just being difficult. And then you'd have customers coming over that didn't want to deal with the girl I worked with and would only come to me, which was sometimes good, but sometimes bad. As Gennaro Gattuso said, sometimes it may be good, sometimes it may be shit. Oh, what a funny guy. Dirty little bastard that as well when he played. The Italian football team is disastrous at the moment. Who would have thunk it, huh? But yeah, retail, it's very clicky. You often don't get the right training. You often get a lot of people who aren't bothered being there. They don't give a shit about the job. And look, I kind of get that to a degree. It is soul destroying. You can just feel the life force drain out of you. And it's often a thing you do part time. I'm not knocking anyone who does it full time. Um, but it wasn't something I saw myself doing for the rest of my life. Put it that way. You have to deal with a lot of people being bitchy and very clicky. And yeah, just dickhead managers lording it over you, and then you might not get on with someone, but you have to work with them for the whole day, and you have to put on the "oh hello, how can I help?" and the fake smiles and everything. I'm not saying you shouldn't be a good human being and be nice, but being fake nice all the time and having to repeat the same thing over and over again. There used to also be this, the little kids' toys or rides that you put €2 coin into, and it'd make the same noise every day. And I remember going into work with a hangover, just like, kill me now. It'd make a noise like da da da. I was there going, if I hear that one more fucking time, I'm gonna smash the thing up. Because in shopping centres, it's just a hustle and bustle, and then I also had to count the petty cash for the day, and then do the float for the tail. And you had about 9 or 10 people, as you say, it was in the square in Tallaght, so you'd have people sitting up watching you, and you're there kind of huddling, making sure the money's okay, and you're kind of looking, thinking, where the fuck are the security guards? Because when we're doing the money, like when we're counting the cash, the whole shopping centre is supposed to be closed. The security seemed to have left, but the scumbag young fellas didn't. They were still hanging around, which was very dodgy. Um, but anyway, that's retail. Also, the hospitality section, or sector. So I worked in a cafe, and that's a lot of multitasking. That's literally cleaning plates, dishes, bowls, whatever you've got, glass as well. You have to make food. You have to do the coffee. You have to do the till. People are trying to cut corners and to manage time as best they can. They're also trying to manage as much money as they can. So the employers are putting on less staff at certain hours because usually those hours aren't busy. So they're trying to basically not pay someone. They're trying to get away with not paying someone for a specific time period, and then what that does is that creates a rush. So if you had one more member of staff there, you'd be fine. But because there's nobody going around picking up balls and dishes, it puts you up shit creek without a paddle and makes the workload greater for the two people that are on. So when I started, it felt grand. It felt like a positive environment. I had a good manager. She was quite helpful and understanding. When I told her I was autistic, I felt comfortable telling her that, and she was quite empathetic and compassionate. And a few times I was late and I should have been on time, and she was still very nice about it. You really need to, you just need to keep an eye on your time. She was nice to me about it, but I was depressed, and I was struggling to get in on time, and that was on me. And she was nice about it. And I basically started losing the love for the job. I used to cycle in or walk in, and then eventually one of the days I was overweight and miserable. And my mum just turned to me and she said, "You look fucking miserable. Do you want me to drop you in?" I was only down the road, it was an easy walk or cycle. And I just said, "Please, would you?" And she said, "Yeah, no problem." My mum and my brother both said they felt really sorry for me when I was working there because I had a big, massive gut on me. We got a very good staff discount, so I just started eating really fatty food, really, really bad food. I'd bring home cakes for the day as well, and I'd just eat them. I was going out the weekends drinking and spending my wages on what I shouldn't have been, and I just lost all drive. And it was when I was going to the gym a lot, but then I just took a massive break because I was so miserable. Got a really bad shoulder injury here from rugby and just wasn't in a great headspace. I was in college as well at the time and struggling, I was. And I decided to take time off working out and looking after myself physically to study and to, basically catch up on all the learning I should have been doing. But again, another female member of staff, most of it was female members of staff. So I only really worked with Irish female members of staff and then foreign men and women. So most of the staff were foreign or female. One of the Brazilian lads I worked with was gay, so quite effeminate. Bruno, Pedro Bruno. His nickname, they used to call him Bruno, but his real name was Pedro. He's a funny guy, he was nice, but he was also a cute hooer, as we'd say. He'd be counting the receipts and pretending like he was doing it longer than he was, so he didn't have to help me do the sweep. So a little bit lazy there. But yeah, there was one woman that I spoke about before who did the morning shift and then left at around midday. And she used to just be in my ear all the time, like, "Come on, you need to be faster. Come on, for fuck's sake, you should know this by now. You're here long enough." For, ridiculous things she'd be shouting at me over. And I rarely snapped at her. I was like, "Give me a moment, would you? Like, I'm trying to focus." Or I'd say, "I need help. And she'd say, "It's not up to us to do it for you. You have to do it." I was like, when I was in the back doing dishes, so the way my mind works is if I'm in the back doing dishes and someone says, "We need you out the front," my brother's on to me there. One sec. Another distraction. My brother needed me to spot him out in the gym. He's a big boy. He lifts a fair bit, much more than me, but I'm gonna get a sip of water. um, should have done that while I was taking a break, but I forgot I had it. Mouth's getting dry. I was talking about working in the hospitality sector, something which I have done quite a bit actually, and it hasn't all been bad. I can see a spider slowly dropping down. I can move him up, or you might see him come down now, just right in my eye line. There's definitely some ADHD in me because I get distracted so easily, but we leave him off. And if he wants to be in the video, he can. So yeah, having someone screaming in your ear all the time, constantly telling you, "You're doing that wrong, you're doing that wrong." But then, like, I'm remembering where I was at now. So I was in the back washing the dishes, and I would ask to go in there and do that, or people would send me in there if they could see I was overwhelmed and needed a bit of a breather. And I was like, "That's perfect for me." But I was in washing the dishes because that's what I was asked to do. So I did that. And then people were like, you need to come out and help us. You can't just stay in here all day. You need to come in and give us a hand. And I was there like, okay, but you need to tell me that you need a hand. I can't see. They expected me to be peeking out and looking every single time to see if they were busy or not. It's like I focus on the dishes and I wash them. I'm not constantly peeking out, making sure that you're all right. I'm also focusing on what I'm doing. If you need my help, call me and I will come out to you. No problem. I had no issue with that, but you need to let me know if you need a hand. Sorry, Dan, can you come out and give us a hand? No problem, and you can get back to the washing when you're done. But people don't do that. They just scream at you like, "Come on, you need to fucking help us." But then when I said I needed help, people were like, "We're busy, we can't help you." I was like, "Well, I need help, and I'm only new." So that really boiled my blood, the double standards and um, just how people are willing to take their anger out on a young fella, and I've seen that a lot more. So young fellas like myself, we get a much harder time than young ones, from what I've seen. If you've got a different experience, please let me know. But I've seen more young women claim that they're being bullied or harassed when they're simply being asked to do their job. And one of the girls that I worked with in the clothes shop that was mentioned previously in retail, she started crying because the manager told her what she was doing was wrong. And she said, "Stop picking on me, stop bullying me." I thought she was having a laugh, but she was serious. She was shy at her job. And I'm not saying I was excellent at it, but she was always late. She was lazy. You couldn't say boo to her. And she just started saying that she was being bullied and picked on and harassed. Another girl that I worked with there in the same clothes shops, just kind of going back for a second, she showed up regularly coming down off drugs or hungover and would laugh about this. And she only brought one shoe to a customer in footwear and then threw the box at them and started laughing because she'd only brought one shoe and she's supposed to obviously bring two so they could try them on. And she left them unaccompanied with that one shoe. You're always supposed to have someone watching at all times because people used to put the shoes on and then walk out with them. Very rare, but they actually got one of the most expensive pairs of Air Max that we sold, Nike Air Max, which were like €600, which is insane for a pair of shoes. So it was much more common the textiles to be robbed. But the point that I'm just kind of getting at and backtracking was she just did not give a shit. The young fellas, yeah, I'm not saying they were great either, like the young men that I was working with, but they got an awful time off managers who were trying to be Billy Big Bollocks and show off to the women in the shop. She'd show up regularly, and then when the manager, who I got on well with the footwear, Jacko, said something to her, she told him to fuck off. And he was like, "I won't be spoken to that way." And he brought it to the attention of the shop. So safe to say, she wasn't kept on after that. She was Christmas staff like me, and they decided not to keep her on, but they didn't sack her on the spot like they probably should have done. Being in the cafe now was a different experience. So you'd make sandwiches for people, you'd make salads, and you'd make breakfasts for them. And the way that I knew I was doing an okay job was that we had a table of 15, so then on the five to that, 10 and 5, just in case you can't understand me, but 15 people, a family. So they were asking, can we bring the tables together and merge them? And they were all having breakfasts, and they kind of understood that it was a big order. And I was like, fair enough, so I have 15 orders to get through. And every so often, the lady who was asking about the tables would say, "Sorry, is that done?" I was like, "Yep, it's in now at the minute, cooking away." And she was like, "Oh, perfect. Sorry, I don't mean to hassle you. I know you're busy. I'm just wondering." But I was like, "No, no, no, don't worry. It's fine. It'll be ready in about 20 minutes or so, and I'll bring them all down." When I got through all those orders, now my process for doing that was a lot different than most people's or neurotypical people's. They would always panic and be flustered, like, "I need this and I need that." My way of thinking was, what can I cook and just leave? So I can leave that for a minute or two and then get on with something else. So you can mix scrambled eggs while rashers and sausages are cooking. Then you put them in, you cook them. You kind of make the task easier for yourself, and then the toast was always last because you need to make sure you only put it in for a small amount of time, didn't burn it. Whereas a lot of people would be flustered back and forth, acting like they're getting a lot of work done, but they're not really. They're giving a little bit to a task here and a little bit to a task there. The way I work is get one thing done, then do another, then do another, then do another. Got very Irish there, but I found it easier to focus on one task at a time, give all my attention to that task, and then dedicate my attention to another one once that one was done. But because that wasn't how everybody else did it, even though it wasn't wrong, we still got the same result. The food was still cooked and the job was still done. So as far as I could see, I wasn't doing anything wrong, but they didn't like that, because it wasn't the way one person showed me, it was the way another person showed me. They'd start arguing with me saying, no, that way is wrong, this way is right. So I was like, but both of you are telling me the same thing, and I'm getting different answers. I'm getting mixed messages here. But I managed to get a table of 15 people, and they were all happy. The woman was so happy with me, she gave me a €15 tip, basically a euro per person. She handed me three €5 notes. And she said, "You were brilliant. Now I have to give you credit for that. Thanks very much. You did a great job. That's for you. Now I don't want you giving that to anybody else." And I was like, "Don't worry, I won't." The rule normally was that you'd split the tips between people, but I put it in my pocket and I was like, "I'm not fucking giving that to anyone because I got no help with that. I did it all myself." I was like, "I'm keeping that, you know." But yeah, no, I just found that it was ridiculous how I was treated. Saying you're here long enough, and then when I say, "Look, I've told you I've got autism or Asperger's," and then she was like, "Is that a form of autism?" So she actually asked me, one of the girls who I had particular difficulty with. I was like, "Yes, yes, it is," and she'd say after that, "Oh, it might get busy. Some things might get said. Don't take it personally." And I was kind of like, "That's not saying you're going to change your ways. That's you saying to me that I have to just accept what you say to me." And then one time she accused me of not doing a job because we had a really lazy girl who, again, a different one, very similar, but she was always hungover. She was always after taking drugs. She used to take ketamine every weekend, normally every weekend. Like she was mad for drugs. She'd take ecstasy and coke, and she had a high opinion of herself, even though she wasn't any prize. Let's just say, I'm not saying I am, but the lads that she was going out with and expecting so much of them, she clearly didn't care who she affected with her negative actions. But anyway, she said that she wanted to go out and she wanted to leave early, so she would do the sweeping and she'd also wipe down the trays, the trays that you bring food on. And there's a funny Irish story of having to take everything off the tray before you eat it, whereas a lot of people will eat food off the tray. It's funny, that's how you know if someone's Irish or not. They'll have to take everything off the tray and then find somewhere to put the tray. Des Bishop did a funny section on it. And it's true. My mum is always doing that. She's always looking to put the tray somewhere, and I'm like, why don't we just eat off the tray? She can't do it. But I was like, fine. She said, I will do the sweeping and I will do the trays. Can you do the mop? And there was only one particular area that we mopped, so I did that. And the next day, the one who was always in from the morning shift to the midday shift kept giving me grief and saying, "Come here to me. Why wasn't this done? Why wasn't that done?" I was like, "Hold on, let me stop you there for a second," because I knew I was right. There was always little comments here or there that I just ignored, but I was like, "No, no, no, I'm calling you out for this. This is bullshit." I said to her, "Hold on a minute. The other one, she was supposed to, I won't give names just in case anyone gets offended or whatever, but everybody knows who she is anyway, but not that she cares." I was like, she was supposed to do it. She told me she'd do it, so you can take it up with her. And she, your one just walked off and blanked me. I was like, hold on a second, you're after giving me all that, a lot of lip, so you better take it up with her. And she was like, don't worry, I will. She didn't, of course, because I was a bit petty about it. I asked the girl who was always taking ketamine, I was like, did she say anything to you? She was like, no, and kind of laughed it off. So no consequences for her, but I have to get all this. And I just thought that's bullshit. That's ridiculous. Um, but say la vie, it is what it is. I just thought that was complete and utter bullshit. That was so unfair. The fact that I have to get all this and then I'm not even the one responsible. She never complained when I did wipe down the trays and sweep the floor, because I always did it to the best of my ability. Um, which brings me on to another point. So I was told by all the members of staff in the shop that we closed at 5 p.m. Um, so that's what I said to customers when they asked. And then the big boss used to come in sometimes and she'd work with the staff. So everybody was panicking because they obviously weren't doing things correctly. So they were like, oh shit, the big boss is coming and you're on with her tonight, so good luck. They didn't tell me anything. we usually just swept and mopped the floor, but we were supposed to use a deck scrub, so a thing with really hard bristles and go over the floor properly, like a big toothbrush essentially. But I wasn't told any of this. And then customers would ask, sorry, when are you closed? And I'd say 5 o'clock, or, they'd say, oh, can I order something? I was like, yeah, but you'd want to be quick because we close soon. And the boss was like, why are you telling everyone we close at 5 o'clock? And I kind of just pretended like I didn't hear her because I knew that I'd have to say, everybody's told me we close at 5 o'clock. And then I'm trying not to get my colleagues into trouble, even though they should have told me we close at 5:30. Technically, if she asks, no one ever said anything to me. They just kind of threw me to the jackals, if you like that phrase. But I kind of felt like, sound guys, cheers for that. And I kind of said it to them. I was like, why didn't anyone tell me this? They were like, oh yeah. Some of them were like, oh yeah, sorry. But they didn't seem bothered by it. It wasn't my fault anyway. The boss was even saying there's obviously a lot of things around here not getting done that should be, but nothing was done about it at all. So it was ridiculous, really. Um, so yeah, what else? I've talked about a couple of these things before, so I am going to repeat what I was saying, but I feel like it's important for the video, the same woman who I had a lot of arguments with, she was once saying something to me while I was focusing on my work, and a customer complained about the way she spoke to me, and that was treated as a mutual argument because I remember the boss coming in and I was saying what was happening, saying I didn't appreciate what she'd said, but she was like, "Oh look, yeah, we probably could have handled it better, and I'm sorry." And I was like, all right, fair enough. And we kind of made up, and the boss was kind of saying the importance of teamwork, the spiel like about teamwork was real Americanized, of productivity, and yes, we can. And I look like I'm punching myself in the face, but nothing came of that. That was a waste of time. And we also got training on disabled customers. It was called a DARE scheme, which is basically training to say that you've been taught how to deal with disabled customers. And I've talked about how I don't like the fact it's always the customer that's disabled in the scenario. What about the employee? And then everybody getting outraged when they're seeing hypothetical situations of a disabled customer. It's not real, it's just role play. And they're like, oh my God, I'd be so angry if that happened. And I was there kind of thinking, so it's okay to treat staff poorly if they're disabled, but not customers. Gotcha. And then there was another scenario where I just basically knew that the boss didn't care, that the boss liked your one and wasn't going to ever take my side. So I was doing the sweeping and the mopping, and the other one that I was with in the shop was watching the Dublin Gaelic match, so Gaelic football on her phone. The rule was you weren't allowed to go on your phone when you were working, so she was breaking the rules. But I was kind of like, I don't really give a shit, as long as it's not preventing me from doing what I need to do, I can get on with my work. And the main boss came in and she looked really angry and she was like, why is that phone on? Kind of looking, why is that phone on? It's not supposed to be on in work. And ready to, bite my head off. I think she expected a reaction from me. I was perfectly calm because I just said, it's not my phone, it's your one's, so you can take it up with her. you know, I was just perfectly calm. I was just like, it's not mine. I'm not looking at it. And then when she found out that it wasn't my phone, she was like, oh, hello, and talking really nicely. And I was there kind of going, oh, so you're ready to bite my head off. Of course, I didn't say this because you put your head down and work hard like you're told to. Um, but yeah, say la vie. Basically knew then that it was because of who I was and because I wasn't as well known or as long in the job. Tried my damnedest in that job a lot of times, and I got very depressed. And there was always little comments here or there. And the real thing that I got pissed off by was when there was a new girl starting. And I talked about this example too, but I asked for a lady who came in all the time, a regular customer who was a bit more passive, and she didn't complain, even though her food was late a few times. So I said, sorry, how long have you been waiting? And she said, oh, about half an hour. I was like, oh, that's not right. Because I was finishing my lunch and I said, do you want me to say it to the people up there? And I'll ask if it's done. I'll ask my colleagues. She said, you wouldn't mind, would you? And I was like, no, 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 not at all, not at all. Sorry, just one sec now. Here, Bar. had a pooch to attend to. He's all good. It's the neighbour's dog. He's a little shit of a yoke, a little terrier that nips all the time. And I remember when he came into our garden before, and I picked him up, and he kind of nipped at me. I barely even felt it because little dogs, their bark is always worse than their bite. I looked at my hand and there was a little cut in it, and I was like, oh, I barely even felt that. I lifted it up and was like, where are you? I love dogs, so just saying I'd never hurt a dog, but I did kind of grab him and I thought about it because he was annoying me, and he took one of Alf's toys, which is a big no-no. Anyway, want to make sure that Alf's okay first and foremost. One of the comments was asking, was he sad? He has that face, and we have been wondering that ourselves. And we shower him with love and affection. It's just sometimes he gets a little upset or he has an upset stomach, but don't worry, we treat him like a king. I've got scars from where he's nipped at me, but I know he doesn't mean it, so we love him to bits, and then even when he's drawn blood before because he's bitten down playing, um, but I don't think he means it. He's usually biting the sleeve and then he catches your hand by accident. But there's no malice in it, of course. Beautiful boy. But anyway, back to the subject at hand. So I was checking on a regular customer's order, and I went up and I said, "Here, lads, is the order done?" And the new girl that started didn't answer me, and I said, "Is the order done?" And the same girl who took ketamine and was always hungover and never doing her job properly and dragging herself around was saying, Dan, just leave it, let it go. And I was like, I'm checking on a customer's order to make sure it's done, like it's a simple question. She was like, just leave it, you don't have to get involved. It's nothing to do with you. And I said, yes, it is because the customer's order needs to be done. And she started saying that I was being abusive and threatening. And with an Italian girl that worked there who just kind of put her arm around me and said, it's okay, Dan, it's okay, calm down, I'll make sure it's done. And then I found out from one of our managers that a complaint had been made against me, and there'd been two. And I was kind of thinking maybe I did come across as a little bit over the top, but way worse had gotten said to me. And I remember it being said that when I started, I wasn't treated like that. And I said, no, I was treated worse. I had people saying all kinds of things to me and just taking their anger out of me because they were having a bad day and then saying, "Oh, don't take it personally." And I'm like, "I will fucking take it personally because you're having a go at me all the time for everything." And I was like, "I don't appreciate that." And a lot of times I felt like saying something I didn't. I was restraining myself a lot. But my manager brought me out and acted as if I was being ridiculous and being unbelievable. And I was just laughing. I was kind of like, I don't see what your point is here. I've been spoken to terribly and you've done nothing about that at all. You treat me like shit because I actually listen to you and do what you tell me to do. Um, which was ridiculous. But say la vie again. I also, and I've spoken about this before, and I feel like it's because I was the only straight man in the place, or because I'm a big fella. People assume certain things about me, and I always had to ask customers to leave, and I didn't like that aspect of it because you basically will have no comeback if anyone hits you when you retaliate. Even if you just defend yourself. I hear about it all the time, where some little scumbag comes in and tries to rob from a shop, and then a member of staff intervenes, and then that little prick immediately switches from aggressor to victim, and then puts in a claim, says you were heavy-handed with them because you were defending yourself. And who do they always side with? The employee who's trying to go about their life and be a good citizen, unlike the little scrub that's robbing from the place and probably living off benefits. Um, Paul from a channel I haven't mentioned in a while, that gear guy, he talks about it where a worker in Morrison's, which is a chain of grocery stores in the UK. We don't have them here in Ireland. Might have them in Northern Ireland and Belfast and places like that, or the north of Ireland, depending on what way you want to say it. But he was talking about how a member of staff who was there for 20 plus years was in court and lost his job because a serial shoplifter, so someone who was robbing from the place all the time, came in one day and he asked him to put the item back because he saw him stealing it, and your man spat in his face. So he obviously didn't appreciate that and he used minimal force. But the shop didn't want to be associated with someone who restrained the customer. So they got rid of a member of staff that was there for 20 years, and shows that they've no loyalty to someone when it comes down to it. They're just trying to cover their own arse. And that's the advice I was always given anywhere I worked with money. I was always told if they come in with a knife or whatever, hand them the till. Do not try to stop them or do not try to restrain them because you could get hurt or, you know, if you do something, you'll be the one that gets in trouble. But I mean, I kind of took it upon myself as well because I could see nobody else was doing it, but it was always left up to me to ask people to leave. And I spoke about before where I did that and a guy got very aggressive with me, and he was threatening me and he squared up to me, and I knew it was all for show, so I just kind of went, just fucking leave. And he did. So yeah, that was kind of like my adrenaline was racing. Like I thought I could probably take this fella, but a million and one things goes on in this mind while it's happening. I'm often thinking of every possible scenario based on what I do. So I'm there thinking, what's the best possible situation? What's the worst possible situation or outcome? And the worst possible is that the fella beats the shit out of me, embarrasses me in front of everybody. That was what I was thinking. But the best possible scenario was probably that he just walked out, and that's what happened. I was thinking either he goes for me and I hit him and I knock him out, and look like Billy Big Bollocks. But actually, the best scenario was probably achieved because he left like I told him to, and I didn't have to get physical with them or anything. But the fear was there that it might happen, definitely. So yeah, like I mean, the hospitality sector, there's a lot of difficult work that you have to do. It's very stress inducing, which brings me on to other jobs I had because I think, believe that, I'm kind of harping on about that one. It did piss me off a lot, and I got to see how two-faced and mouthy people are. I got to see the worst of women as well in the workplace. That really opened my eyes to how bad and how catty women can be in the workplace. As you say, I've dealt with toxic men, and I will get to that. But I worked in the hospitality sector in a couple of different places. So I worked as a kitchen porter when we moved down here to Wexford. That was actually my first job when we moved down here, and I was still going to college. I did that for 6 months, about 6 months, yeah. And for the most part, I didn't mind it. I think it's funny because the only other people doing the job with me were Syrian refugees. And I've kind of talked about that, how when you hear their story and actually speak to them, you change your perspective completely. So people will say, oh, get them all out, they're stealing our jobs and they're living off benefits. Well, I can safely say that there were no other Irish people working with me. So if we're not prepared to do those jobs, then I don't see any issue with that. One young fellow I worked with, Abdul, was only 17, studying for a leaving cert and doing 15-hour days sometimes. He stayed in the hotel as well. And you meet him, you talk to him. He was separated from his parents when they fled Syria to the Lebanon. And then when they came to Ireland, they were reunited. But he had a hard time of it, and you do have really great understanding of it afterwards, and you have a lot of sympathy towards someone. Not empathy because I never went through anything like that, and touch wood, I never do. But he was working, and I've worked with a lot of good foreign people, but that's another subject for another day. I find that when I'm left alone and told, "Here's what we want you to do," wash dishes, make sure that whatever the chef asks for, like if he said I need woks, let's say, or I need dinner plates, or I need balls washed, there might be something specifically that we needed. I'd be like, yeah, I'll get right on it, and I'd rinse through them. I got to drink as much free 7 Up as I wanted, and that was great, because it's very hot in there. Um, a lot of people said they'd hate to do what I was doing. I actually didn't mind it, so I'm there thinking, aha. You know, we're not weak and we do jobs that other people don't want. Or, I'm not speaking on behalf of all autistic people, just myself. But I did like the aspect of we will leave you off to wash these dishes, and once you do that, we're happy. Once the kitchen is in good working condition, we're happy as well. So I thought that's fine, and that's actually one of my favorite jobs. I had the least stress when I was doing that because you're part of a team. I got on well with the people I worked with in the kitchen. I also got an appreciation for just how tough it is. The chefs are under a lot of stress because they were talking about meeting fine margins and having to order in food that was popular and then throw out food that they thought would be popular but wasn't, and then you're kind of marking out the margins, and it is tough. It's very tough. Chefs do not have it easy anywhere from what I can see. I've only ever met one chef in my life that didn't smoke. I was amazed he didn't. Because most of them do, and I'm not surprised. They have a very stressful job. They also drink a lot because at the end of the day, we would usually have a drink together, and you'd be still wired from the day. It did lead me into bad habits. Like I would smoke on my breaks we'd all go out and we'd have a smoke, and we'd have a laugh and a chat. It's kind of like a bonding session. I drink Red Bull as well, so my heart's not thanking me for that. But also I would be working until sometimes 1 or 2 a.m. So you're still wired, so you have a tough time winding down. And yeah, it does really it leads you into bad habits. So I would sleep until 1 or 2 p.m. the next day, be ready until I was starting my shift. Sometimes I'd have to be in for 2 p.m. in the afternoon, so I'd sleep until about 1. I'd cycle to work. It was good for exercise, but it's long hours. That's one thing about it. So I didn't mind it, but it did lead to bad habits. And then I'd start drinking after my shift. So the night porter and the head barman, we'd just be sitting talking absolute shit for hours, afterwards sometimes because I wasn't ready to sleep and I was in the mood to have a bit of a laugh and a chat with them. So, but it was all right. The actual work and the people make the job a lot easier, I find. So then that kind of brings me on to the job I got after that. I was expecting to stay on, and with the Ukraine war happening, a lot of wealthy Irish businessmen and women cashed in on that fact that they could pay people fleeing war, people claiming refugee status, they could pay them less, and they put us to the back burner. Me and my brother were thinking we were getting a solid job again the next year, and we were like, we're happy with that. We're happy to go back and work with them. But we weren't offered a position, and then we found other work elsewhere. And when we did that, we were then put on the roster and told, "Oh yeah, you're in for this week." And I was like, "Well, we never agreed. You never asked us to come back. You don't just put us on the roster without contacting us and telling us what's going on." So then I ended up working in a takeaway, a chipper, and delicious food, really good. And again, working in kitchens, and it's unsociable hours, and you're making delicious food for everybody else. So again, I would wake up at 1 p.m. and I'd be in for my shift at about 2 or 3 p.m. And you'd be there for about 7.5, 8 hours, and you wouldn't have anything to eat. You'd kind of be picking at chips here and there. So it wasn't very healthy. Probably had about one meal before I went down to start my shift. I was drinking water like it was going out of fashion because, again, really hot in the kitchen. Should need to do it now. But kind of got two experiences. So me and my brother, a job that we both did, we called it Spud Man. And this job I did not mind at all. So before the rush would start, we were doing food prep. So I don't know if you've ever seen the rumbler, but you get all the potatoes on your sieve, you put them into the rumbler. It's like sandpaper. So basically, it's like grates down on them, like a nail file. It grates the skin off them, which basically gets all the skin off without wasting the potato. Then they all come pouring out of the machine into a big bath of water just to clean them off, and if there's any shit left on them. Not shit, human. Well, they do use manure, so I guess it's not beyond the realms of possibility. But You would then get them up, scoop them into another machine, which would chip them and just spit out fresh chips into another big bucket of water, and then you would then scoop them out with another sieve, which kind of looked like the Tin Man from the Wizard of Oz. It looked like the top on his head, and you'd scoop them out, drain them because you don't want to be mixing water and boiling hot oil, which is actually big blocks of lard. I was talking to the fella that I worked for, Simone, who was a lovely guy. Had a very difficult task. So I'm only going to mention people that I mentioned in a positive light. I won't give names if they're not being mentioned in a positive light, because I know you can be done for defamation or whatever. But Simone was telling me the history of chippers in Ireland and how an Italian man decided to cook chips on O'Connell Bridge in lard like they cook in Italy. They don't actually have these chippers back in Italy, but they're famous over in Ireland. So a lot of the chip shops are chippers, as we call them. They call them chippies in England, but ours are better. I'm just saying it now, ours are way better. The Italians do a brilliant job. You'll see a lot of the families are Italian that own these chip shops. They've got a Dublin accent, but then they'll go, va bene, tutto bene, come stai? And it's all right, pal, what can I get you? And then it's like, Giacomo, come stai, va bene, yeah. And the hands are going up. I need to do the hands if I'm going to speak Italian. My boss was always just like, va bene, which means it's good, it's okay. And he made delicious pizzas. Like the food he made was a great standard. Va bene indeed. Salute. But I had really good standards, and I definitely preferred being the chippo man, as I call it, in the spud hut versus working in the kitchen itself. So, like when you're working in the kitchen, it was very hot. You're getting orders rushing back and forth, and I probably didn't do the job as best as I could have done, and I did want to. I came back, so I actually started out for my first 2 or 3 weeks in the kitchen, and then I said I was just feeling overwhelmed, and the boss was really good about that. He was very understanding, and when someone else actually told him that I worked with, told him that I was autistic, and I didn't think much of it, but I often would say to you now, if somebody else says it, say to them, look, that wasn't your place to say it. They shouldn't be the one revealing that kind of information. Maybe it was done out of a good place, but it's up to you to say it. I would say you should say it to the employer, and what they choose to do with that is up to them. But he was very sympathetic of that, and he said, "Look, whatever you need, no problem." I was like, "Mille grazie," I really appreciate that. And he was a good guy, but there were times where I was like, "Look, I haven't been trained properly. I haven't been shown what to do. I need you to retrain me then." If because the one of the guys we worked with, who was on the fryers with me, so putting the chips down, bobbing French fries, as they say, he knew what he was doing, but he was doing things not 100% by the book and not the way my boss wanted it done. So he basically said, "No, no, no, he was doing it wrong. He thought he knew better than everybody else, and I need you to do it this way." And I was like, "That's fine, but I need to know exactly what way you're doing it." And it did take me a bit longer to grasp things. Like sometimes scooping the chips in is actually a very fine art, getting the right amount in and folding the bags over. It is, you do get an appreciation for how difficult a lot of this stuff is. I was also in charge of the chicken machine, so the dinner boxes. So it's fried chicken in the machine, and it was like a submarine door. You had to slowly open it because if you opened it too fast, the pressure built up, it would burst, and a lot of hot oil and grease would land on you, and it landed on one of the guy's shoulders before it burnt the hole in his t-shirt. But I got the timings wrong, so he said it should have been on about an hour ago, and I was kind of like getting the timings right, multitasking. Sometimes I'd get the food out, so I'd have battered sausages to do, I'd have fried cod to do, I'd have onion rings to do, and I'd kind of be looking at what do I need to get done, and I'd get it done, drain off the fat, put it in there's a little heater, that would keep the food hot, but it'd only keep it hot for a certain time period. And then people would be late arriving in to get their food, and he would say to me, "Dan, the food's going to go cold if you do that. You need to make sure that your timing is better." and I struggled to grasp it. It was difficult to grasp it at the time, because I was looking at orders that I had, and I'd have them from left to right, which was done the earliest versus what was done the latest. So I get through that, then I get through that. You take the receipt down, you've probably seen it done before, and you put it through the little spike. Just don't put your hand through it like Mr. Ack, right? From Open All Hours, Ronnie Barker and David Jason. What a show! But he puts his hand down on it. You know the spikes where you keep your receipts. So you have your receipts here, um, and then you just pop them down at the end of the day. So I would be taking, to say for argument's sake, be taking that receipt down and taking another one once the order was done. You don't do it until the order's done because then you don't know what you need to do. You know what I mean? It was easier just to keep them up there and take another sip. So there is a lot of time management and it is tough, and I have an appreciation for people who work in that industry because it's time consuming. Where I found I was definitely better, and my brother was as well, was the spud hut, popping the chips in, getting them prepared, then popping the potatoes into the spud hut, um, and dragging the buckets out. So the buckets were quite heavy. We're bigger fellas, so we could actually pull them a lot easier than other people could. Then we had to just basically put drinks in the fridge and make sure there were enough pizza boxes so you'd fold them over. And I got really good at doing it, without even looking, just popping them. So, you kind of build up a way of doing it. And my boss was very reasonable. So as long as I got everything done before 10 a.m., he was happy. Or sorry, I was in at 10 a.m. It was 2 p.m., so about 2 or 3 before they opened. So I could come in at whatever time I wanted as long as that was done. That was the main thing. He says, I don't mind if you're in a bit later than we agreed, but if things aren't done, there will be issues. I can't have you coming in at say 1 p.m. and nothing's done. So you kind of had a bit of wiggle room there, which I thought was, again, very reasonable to him. And then when I was done my shift, I could cycle down. Well, I didn't even have to. I could walk with the bike because we were right next to the beach. Um, so that was nice. That was really nice. Especially because I was sweating buckets. I was covered in starch and potato juice. Having a nice swim afterwards was really nice. So that's what I did. I definitely worked better in most jobs I've had where I'm given a task. People aren't constantly in my ear and I'm just doing them. So that was my experience in the hospitality sector. And I've had more experience with them. Retail, hospitality would have been my main sections. Construction sites, I found them to be very macho and toxic masculine places. So where I was talking about toxic women that I worked with, men could be very bad too. They're always looking to have a go at you. And because it's definitely a male dominated environment, it's rapido, rapido, everything needs to be done fast. They don't really give a shit about the job they're doing. They drink an awful lot, sign off and trying to stay sober. It's probably one of the worst environments you can be in from what I've seen. The lads that I worked with had serious drug problems and alcohol. They also gambled a lot, so I talked about that. Literally every addiction you can imagine. These guys were just shoveling shit, spitting where they worked, smoking they were chain smoking and smoking like a trooper was what I was going to say. Like a chimney, I should have said. Like some of the guys would go through 60 cigarettes in one day easily. They'd be there digging a hole with a cigarette in their mouth. They take it out. They'd spit where they were working. They didn't give a shit about the job they were doing. Um, when you see people doing a trade, I often think it's a craft. A craftsman, like a carpenter making a beautiful house. Building the beams like you see in your attic. I think it's a vocation. Is the word I'm looking for. Like I have a wooden desk here and I like to think that the person making it is proud of their work and wants to do a good job, not just, doing it for the sake of it so they can get money to drink and smoke. But that's what I've seen a lot of people do who work in trades. They don't give a shit about the job being done right. They do it as best they can, for so that nobody will give them shit over it, if that makes sense. So they're not doing the job excellently, but they're doing it satisfactory. you know, so they won't be called out for doing the job shit, but they really just want to get out of there as quick as possible. And I don't blame them. It's loud, there's a lot of dangerous machinery, and your sensory system will be in overdrive, and be prepared for lads ripping into you because it's going to happen. There's no two ways about it. And some guys can take it, but I see a lot of guys who can't. A lot of guys then do it to other people because they think it's the norm. Violence begets violence, and hurt people, which basically means if someone is ripped into when they're a young fella, they then think, okay, that's the rite of passage. I now do it to the next fella. My best advice for someone who's autistic, if they are working in trades, typically people who work in trades have family members or friends, try and get in with one of their companies because it just makes things a lot easier if you know the people. I was going in with people I didn't know. My dad didn't organise anything. He said he would, but he didn't. He just threw me in the deep end with a lot of people I didn't know. They didn't know why I was there, and they didn't know what jobs to give me, so they gave me the worst jobs ever. Cleaning out toilets on construction sites, which are very unpleasant, let me tell you. Glad I didn't have to do that for very long. It was disgusting. I saw guys taking coke in there, sniffing a bit because they literally got no sleep. I saw lads who would come in and they looked rotten and they tell me that they fell asleep in the same clothes that they were wearing that day. They had a few cans when they went home and then they woke up from a drunken stupor in the same clothes, covered in sweat and God knows what else, and then came straight back into work like that. They stank, they looked rotten and they were. I saw a lot of people as well that were only in their 40s and 50s with absolutely banjaxed knees. Their knees had given out on them. They had arthritis. Their backs were giving out. They had big beer bellies. They just looked very unwell. They looked very sickly, and it looked like it had taken it out of them. Put it that way. And I just thought to myself, it'd be quite foolish of me to think that I won't end up like this. With bad back and bad knees. It looked like they were in bits. They had families that they never saw because they were always working because you do work hard hours. And yeah, it just didn't seem right. There was lots of addiction. Addiction was rife in the trades, and I saw it. Lads would go straight after their shift into the pub and spend nearly all their wages on alcohol or drugs or gambling as well. So I thought, no, no to that. Um, and yeah, you just it comes with it. If you're going to work in the trades, they probably call you soft for saying that you were bullied in the workplace or accusing anyone of workplace bullying, but that's what it is. you know they will just hammer into you and they will have a go at you for anything and anything, everything and anything. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. It's loud. There's people shouting at you. There's a lot of big dick macho energy. That kind of thing. Of the younger generation just aren't tough enough and grow yourself a set of bollocks, grow a thicker skin, all that sort of shite. Which I really hate. And I've said that before. I do think like yeah, you need to learn the hard way sometimes, but I also think that there's a way of doing that. If someone is being a bit of a handbag, fair enough if you say, stop being such a handbag. But if they're doing the job or if you haven't shown them how to do it correctly and they do it wrong and you start fucking hammering into them left, right, and centre and calling them all sorts of names, it's not really going to help them. And you're going to make more aggressive, angry men who think this is the norm because at a certain point it becomes normal. You think this is the only way to do it is to give it back, or I get to start taking my anger out on somebody else. And the suicide rate in construction work is very high. I might actually make a separate video talking about that, but people say, oh, dentists have a very high suicide rate because nobody wants to see them. And it is high, but construction is higher. And I kind of thought to myself after actually experiencing some of that, surely this has got to have a very high suicide rate. The lads in here eat terribly, they eat such shit food. The lads that I worked with would get some potato wedges in a deli for their breakfast. then they'd have a can of Red Bull and a cigarette, and then they'd go off to work, and then they'd be drinking alcohol, and then they'd be eating terribly, really bad diets, doing hard physical work that you need to be eating well to do it, and you can do it well, but a lot of them weren't. And they're not all bad people either. I met a lot of very funny fuckers in that job. They would take the piss out of you, but in a humorous sort of way. And that's when I kind of was like, right, this is a laugh. They're having a laugh and a joke with me. I understand that they're not ripping into me. They're just having a laugh, And like two lads from Cork that I worked with, real sarky, but they were funny. And they could see me, I had a black eye from playing a rugby game, and I was knackered from being up at 5 a.m. And that's the other thing, early starts. If you're not up for that, do not get into construction. But they start just going, cheer up, boy, we never happened. They started joking about how I got thick with them, so they had to give me a black eye and sort me out, but in a good way, in a funny sort of way, not in an aggressive, I'm the big man and you're nothing, They were welcoming me, they were actually bringing me in for a laugh and a chat, which I appreciated. Um, but yeah, it's a toxic environment, and I'd be very cautious about that if you're neurodivergent because there's a lot of really big bollocks behavior and toxic macho behavior. A lot of toxic masculinity in the trades. I'd say it's at its highest in jobs like that, for sure. But on a good side of it, I actually didn't mind the work. Manual work I find okay. Like it actually feels like you're using your body, which you're supposed to do, and that does feel good. There is a certain good feeling you get from doing the actual work. It's more so the environment you're in. The toxic masculinity is very, very toxic. And there's a lot of lads that call you soft just for wearing PPE that you're supposed to wear to do the job. Like I saw a lad get called a wimp because he was very by the book. He didn't like his eyes, for instance, being touched. He's very sensitive about his eyes. So he had a big pair of safety goggles that he wore. He always wore the protective gloves that he was given, Kevlar gloves. And people called him soft. They ripped into him literally for doing the job as he was supposed to do it. And I saw other lads not wearing any gloves, not wearing any eye protection, using an angle grinder with sparks shooting off it. Well done, you. You're going to injure yourself. You could go blind, or you could lose an eye from the blade actually catching it. If you don't go blind from the sparks, the blade can go through it. You could fucking die. You could lose a finger. You often see carpenters missing fingers because of the saws that they're using, the buzz saws and skill saws, which I think are great. I've got a really good one out in the shed. And I'm sure carpenters use them, and it's second nature to them at this point. But take your eye off the ball for a second, and you lose a finger. When I was doing my safe pass the last time, I've done it 3 times, and basically what it means is you've done a course that qualifies you to be on an active construction site. So one of the pet peeves for the guy who was setting the course, a really sound guy, I really liked him. He made it go by so fast, but he said lads who have a hoodie on and they have the little tassels, for tightening the hoodie when they had their hard hat, the helmet on over the hoodie, because one fellow was using a drill, like a jackhammer, an SDS drill, for chipping up tiles and or sometimes roadworks, and the tassel got stuck in the actual drill. The drill then kicked back and went through his eye because he wasn't wearing the appropriate eye protection. He lost an eye, and he had a bit of brain damage too because it went right through and into the brain. So it kind of brings it home, and that's why I always advise you follow the safety, follow site safety, and any PPE you're offered, you wear it and you do it properly. You wear it the right way because it's there to keep you safe. And I think for someone with an autistic brain, that makes sense to me. I'm kind of like, okay, this is what it's for. It's here to keep me safe. I'm absolutely going to wear it, no problem. You got ear protectors too, which you put on so that you don't go deaf or get tinnitus. It all makes sense to me. Um, so yeah, that's the construction sector. There's another one now that I have very limited experience on, and I only did this as I didn't even do it for pay. I did it for free tickets to a concert, but that's security work, and I've only got a brief taste of that. And if you want to see people who've done it a bit more, watch Paul on That Gear Guy. I think his name is Paul. I'm pretty sure it is. I've started watching his videos again. The channel is That Gear Guy. He did it for 23 years. My uncle did. He was a bouncer as well for a few years, so I've kind of heard stories, but I've also done a little bit, just at concerts, stewarded more than anything. But I think that's one of the worst jobs you could do. Like if you have to do that as a job, as an autistic person, I only did it the odd time for free tickets to a concert. I can only imagine how difficult it is. And Paul from the channel, That Gear Guy, says that you're not allowed to do anything nowadays. It's much more restricted to what you can actually do. If you put hands on anybody and restrain them, even in a legal way, people will claim, they make claims against you and you lose your license or whatever. People will threaten you. So the reason why I think it's probably one of the worst jobs you could do, construction work and security work as an autistic person, and I mean nightclub bouncing and things like that. Maybe working as security in a shop wouldn't be too bad, but if you're doing it in nightclubs, you have to do night shift. First and foremost, you have to be bored for many hours because you're just standing there doing nothing. Trying to look tough with your arms crossed. Um, but then you have to switch into action immediately. And that for me is a difficult one. Then you've got arseholes, who are all trying to give you jip and give you grief because you're a big guy. But one that I would really focus in on there is switching from boredom to action like that. So I find that tough. I find it difficult to process information as fast as neurotypical people do. I see that a lot. If I'm prepared and people are getting into an argument and then there's somebody else here, I'm probably better at dealing with that because I'm able to sort that out. And I have dealt with conflict quite well in a lot of situations. But if I have to stand there and bored and I'm probably struggling to stay awake half the time because we're not meant to do night shift, we're meant to be asleep at night, and that's when people go to nightclubs. So you're seeing everybody else enjoying themselves first and foremost, and then something might kick off and bam, you have to spring into action. That transition for me is difficult because I've kind of been winding down and I'm bored, and then I have to deal with someone hitting somebody else and try and restrain them. I would find that tough. And as you say, I've dealt with customers being unruly and asked them to leave, and I've broken up situations, and I've done it quite well, in fairness, in my everyday life. And I think I handled it quite well. I made videos talking about that, which you can check out too. I think the result that I wanted was achieved. But I feel like nightclubs are an environment that I don't like, even when I'm out enjoying them and drinking in them. Imagine if you have to do that stone cold sober, standing there, waiting, and then it all kicks off. I would fucking hate that. And the experience I have had, I'm just standing there like a spare part. You're literally standing there on your phone, and then something might kick off and you have to deal with it. Then you have to show people where to park. Then if they don't park at the correct place, you have to stop them and report them. You've got people saying, "Oh, I want to see your security license," and then I didn't actually have one. Um, I didn't get it as bad as some people did. Some people were spoken to really poorly. Where people were like, "Oh, I want to see your security license. Oh, you don't have one. Well, I'll do whatever I want." That'd be humiliating. I think I'd be really pissed off if someone did that because I'd be like, "Fuck you," being an arsehole. But they're also right. If you don't have a security license, you haven't got a leg to stand on. And you just have people being arseholes, and I get nervous, I get anxious, I build up a situation and I build up of what could happen. And like I say, the transition from standing there bored out of your skull to okay, you have to drag someone out and pin them to the floor or whatever. That's something that's difficult for me, and I've seen autistic people as well. Processing the information takes a bit longer, so I need to process and go, right, what's happening? And I mean, that's probably something you should still do if you are in that sort of work. But it doesn't seem worth getting into. You know, you could be stabbed. People would see you and know that you're a bouncer, so they'll probably start on you, especially if you've just done your job and told them you have to leave. If they see you out and about, they could definitely, they might stab you because their own ego's being bruised, you know? So I think that's probably up there as one of the worst jobs you could do if you're autistic, because you're dealing with a lot of very aggressive people. Now, the drugs people are taking as well make them unpredictable. And I think as being an autistic person, I speak for all of us when I say we don't like unpredictability. We like things set out the way they are. And someone who is aggressive and on drugs is as unpredictable as it gets. Anything could set them off. I'm clicking my fingers a lot here. But there has to be a certain level of predictability with what we're doing. And drunk, aggressive people on drugs are anything but predictable. They could snap the slightest thing. And even if you beat the shit out of them and look good and look macho or whatever, you know, raw, you could be sued, you could be brought to court, you could be told that you used excessive force, especially nowadays. I advise you to check out Paul on the channel, That Gear Guy, if you want to see more about stuff like that. But he even says it nowadays, like back when he was doing it, you could actually do something, you know, you were able to operate within the law, whereas now there's a lot more rules on what you are and aren't allowed to do. And the law, unfortunately, tends to side with the scumbag scrote that's been in and out of prison since they could crawl. You know, they've been in and out of jail their whole lives. They know the system. They also know to claim off the system. That's what they do. They're parasites. And they will get the payout and you will lose your job and probably end up with people threatening you. So the way I think of it is if you use violence, someone will come after you and threaten you. You'll probably lose your job and you'll probably end up having to pay a fine. You could go to jail. I don't see the win-win. You know, I don't see any sort of positive scenario in that. You have to be very careful with how you restrain people. And when I was doing security work at concerts, I was told usher people away, but if you put your hands on them, you could get sued because I didn't have my security license, which is a whole separate thing. So I was told just to report it, be on the radio going, oh yeah, Delta Foxtrot Tango Bingo Bongo. We've got someone here causing trouble, you know, and then they were like, let's call the Gardaí. And Gardaí Síochána, the Irish police. Once I'd done my time, got the tickets that I wanted, I was like, I'm fucking out of here. I don't want to ever do this again. Probably didn't help that one time I was hungover doing it. But yeah, I wouldn't advise that. The army is an interesting one because I have a mate who's also autistic and he's been in the army since he was quite young. You know, he always wanted to do it. He's had family members that did it, and he loves the law and order. You know, the predictability of it. Like there will be some tests where you're exhausted, you're sleep deprived, and I don't know how well I'd cope with that. But he says it's regimented. You know, everything is regimented. You get to train and you get told how to put on your socks correctly. So that might work for you, you know, if you're more like that, or maybe someone who has a bit more ADHD and needs to do a job where they're active. Perhaps construction could work for you, but I think there's ways of going about it. You know, I think jobs in general where people are they've clearly laid out what they want you to do, and they give you a lot of the time to go and do it. When I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, and I'm hoping to get back into it, touch wood, fingers crossed, all the rules that you had to follow and the SOPs, like the standard operating procedures, the good manufacturing practices, GMP. I still remember the definitions. I thought it was easy to get my job done because it was laid out in front of me. I had to do it exactly as I was told to do it. And if I did that, everyone was happy. The problem is time constraints and lads not or lasses not following the job specification. And people will always cut corners, you know. If everyone is doing it wrong, even though you're the only one doing it right, they will all side with each other, and then you look like you're doing it wrong. Do you know what I mean? Majority rules, and unfortunately, if everyone is doing it wrong, and you come in and do it right and tell them that they're doing it wrong, they look at you like you're a dickhead because you're actually doing it the way it's supposed to be. But they've decided that they're all happy doing it this way. You've come in and done it the way you're supposed to, but you look like you're being a know-it-all and being a bit of a prick. But I found the pharmaceutical industry, when rules are followed, it makes a lot of sense to my wonderful autistic brain. And I could do the job, and people were happy with me. Like I learned how to do a job that should take about 6 months training. I was in there in 3 weeks. I've talked about that too, but it all made sense to me, and I was shitting myself. I was panicking that I wouldn't be able to do it right, but it actually all made sense. The rules are all laid out in front of you. If you couldn't do it, then you're a simpleton. I'm sorry, but you are, because you were allowed to bring in a paper document with all the rules written on it. And you could have that in front of you as you were doing the job. So it's not as if you had to remember all the stuff like in an exam. You had it right in front of you, and you just needed to do exactly what it said on the tin. But as I say, certain trainings weren't given to me, and over a paper document. I'll get my paper out again. Putting that in the wrong bin, that's what got me off doing my job. I wasn't suspended, but I was taken off while they did an investigation, an internal investigation. People were breaking the rules all the time. There were demarcation lines, so this area is dirty, this area is clean, and stuff cannot be passed from dirty. Sorry, you can go from dirty to clean, but you have to wash the stuff and wipe it in. But you can't take clean stuff and put it into dirty and then bring it back in, if that makes sense. And one of the girls I worked with passed a trolley in from the dirty side into the clean side without wiping it in, and someone saw her doing it, and we got in big trouble for it. And rightly so. Looking back, you can say the fellow was an arsehole, but he was dead right to do what he did. She shouldn't have done that. She was breaking the rules. She wasn't wearing the proper PPE either, and she was just being lazy and cutting corners. Don't do that. Don't cut corners, because you get in trouble for it. I think as autistic people, we won't cut corners. Where possible, we will do the job as best as we can. It's only you know, when there's issues in the workplace that were there before we got in there, where then our brains are scrambled, because we're like, okay, but this is what it's supposed to be. This is what you're telling me, but this is how it actually is. Do you know what I mean? We kind of see through the bullshit. But then, if we want to get along with everybody and actually work productively, we have to carry on in a faulty system, and that's difficult. I hope you know what I mean by that. But basically, when there are technologies and instruments that are supposed to work a certain way and they don't work that way, they break down and they fail you. That's very hard then for me anyway. I don't know about other autistic people. I find it very difficult to function in that sort of environment, because you're telling me one thing, but you're doing another. And I can see that you're obviously lying, but people, either they can see what's going on, they choose to ignore it, or they're blind to it and they can't see that what is being said versus what's being done are not compatible. So I hope that makes sense anyway, guys. Um, so if I was kind of going to rank best to worst jobs based on what I've done and friends that I've seen, I think, sometimes you can find good and bad and everything, but the hospitality sector, I would say, is a tough one. I wouldn't say avoid it, but I would say try and get a job in the kitchen. Some autistic people could make great chefs because their attention to detail is outstanding, but it's a very stressful job, and I have huge respect for chefs. I was only doing it like half the work day, well, probably only a quarter even of what they were doing. I found that difficult. But I also found being a kitchen porter excellent. Found it great. Found being a spud man or chippo man. Funny video on that if you ever want to look it up. It's hilarious. But dark sense of humor, and that definitely plays into it. But jobs like food prep where I'm left off. So I think you can kind of I don't want to generalize and go, all these jobs are bad, all those jobs are bad. No, I want to kind of find an area and maybe say, if you are going to work in this sector, maybe here's what you should consider. So, if you're going to work in the hospitality sector, try and get a job where you're given tasks and you complete them, without anyone in your ear, because I found that I actually did that quite well. Like food prep, getting all the chips ready. Perfect. Never an issue with that. A lot of people didn't want to do that job. Whereas me and my brother, we were fine with that. We loved doing that because we were left alone. We could do the job and then afterwards go down to the beach and cool off. I got to cycle to and from work, so good exercise, active job. And then before the rush, when loads of people are coming in, I get to go home. And some people love dealing with people and they love back and forth. Not me. It drains me. So actually having that time where I can do my job, do it well, and then leave. Once everything's done, the boss is happy and I'm happy. And the fact that he was willing to have a bit of wiggle room and say, usually the sport man came in at 9 a.m., but I came in at 10 a.m. I was struggling to get up in the mornings. I was on Lexapro, but I got in and I got the job done before they opened up the shop. He was happy with that, so that's how we did it. The construction industry, if you're going to work in that, try and get in with people who you know and who you like, because if you're the new guy and you don't know anyone and you've no connections, chances are you're going to be ripped into. They're going to go for the weakest link. People can say that they won't, but they will. You are the weakest link. Bye bye. Anne Robinson at her finest. Um, yeah, I feel if you're going in without any sort of connections or you don't know anybody, it's going to be very hard, and I could bullshit you, but I've done it and it was daunting, And I mean, I also think you should go outside your comfort zone, but with work like that, lads are going to rip into you. It's very toxic, very, very toxic. Um, but there are ways around it. And I've seen guys absolutely thrive when they're working with family members, family members' construction business or whatever. They get the contract, they choose who they work with, and off they go. Once they do the job, everybody's happy. I've seen that work for people. And I've always liked working with my hands. Me and a friend did up a neighbour's garden. We poured cement for him. We dug up foundations, put down new foundation. We did a great job because I was working with people I liked. It's very easy to do any job when you like the people you work with. 100%. Retail, I would say it's soul destroying for everybody. To be honest, my advice on that would be do it while you're studying, or if you're trying to get somewhere else, do not have it down for a lifetime job because it will suck the life out of you. It's not manually draining, it's not physically intensive. It's quite physically easy, but it's soul destroying, having to repeat the same thing to customers over and over again and put on a smiling face even though you're having a bad day or you feel like shit. I'm not saying be an arsehole to everybody. That's not saying, treat everybody like shit because you're having a bad day. Be a good guy, be a nice person, but I would say retail should be reserved for people who have something else they want to get later on in their life. And look, if you're a manager, like a manager in Lidl makes €15 an hour or something like that. So like I'm not knocking any job. Just want to say that right now. You need people to do specific jobs. But there are certain ones that just aren't for certain people. I think all autistic channels I watch seem to agree retail is one of the worst areas to work in if you're autistic or neurodivergent. One that I have experience with nearly a year, childcare. I think that is a very bad area to get into if you're male or if you're autistic. I happen to be both, yet I did it. It does feel rewarding at times. When you feel like you've helped the kid out, it does feel amazing, but there's a lot of screaming kids and it's stressful as fuck, because they're unruly, they won't do what they're told. There's very little you can actually do as a youth worker to get them to behave. Corporal punishment days are gone, and I mean, that's a good thing, 100%. But my God, sometimes you're kind of there thinking, I understand now. Jokes, jokes. Um, but you are kind of there thinking, you come in with a really idealistic approach of, oh, children are great, they're all wonderful in their own way, but then you find out, oh, this kid's a little shit and they're doing my head in, when you're there pulling your hair out if you have any. I don't, but it's loud. It's it's just very fucking loud. um, yeah, not ideal, but it can be reward 100%, and I found it easier working with teenagers, so maybe go for that sort of age group. Say you don't want to work with primary school kids because there's a lot of screeching, a lot of jumping on the back of chairs. You're just like, oh, you're gonna fall and then you're gonna get hurt. Don't want you to get hurt, and then I also don't have to fill out the paperwork or explain to your parents how I was watching you fall and I did nothing to stop it happening. You know, it's yeah, it'll get the adrenaline flowing because you'll be stressed out. You'll be there wanting to just pull your hair out. And if you're highly autistic, avoid at all costs. Even being higher functioning as I am, I couldn't do it. And then for males as well, it's not ideal, because we tend to want to stamp our authority on things, and gone are the days where you can do that, unfortunately. I find like jobs where you're not dealing with too many people, where you're given tasks and you can do them, and instructions as well. Like the pharmaceutical industry is probably a great place to get into. It's just unfortunate the experience I had, but I'm hoping that I will get into it again, for sure. Definitely, because it's well laid out. And when it's done right, it's done right. But some companies obviously have their own issues, and you can't solve them all. They either have them or they don't. And it was unfortunate that the company I was in with did, and I had a negative first experience with. But lab work is generally grand because you're left to your own devices, quite literally medical devices or whatever. But once it's specific and you know what you're at, it's perfect. I also found the last job that I left recently, greenskeeping, rewarding, when you're trimming back hedges and cutting grass. I love doing that sort of thing. Was picking up litter though, and you kind of feel like a worthless piece of shit doing stuff like that because you're picking up bags of dog shit and a big bag of rubbish with loads of dog shit bags in it nearly burst in my face. My brother had a similar experience when he was working down in the same chipper as me, and he was cleaning the public toilets, and it really resonated with me. I was kind of like, yeah, I know what you mean. I feel like a worthless piece of shit here. My back was killing me, and I didn't want to associate the beach that I love with, having to pick up bags of shit. So I left, and I also felt like I was wasting my time, but the pay wasn't great, and I've talked about that before. But don't think it was the job necessarily. Well, it was, but it wasn't the worst job I've ever done. It's just that I need to be sorting out something I want to do permanently. I can't be wasting my time with it. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. Another thing that I talked about it with childcare before, but one thing that really upset me was that you can't actually intervene when you know someone's being bullied. There's very little you can do, and that kind of upset me. That I couldn't actually intervene. Um, and just how cold some people can be in that sort of industry. It's kind of like when they're not in our premises, they're not our responsibility, that kind of way. And I get that they have to cover their own arses, but yeah, someone who is, I would consider myself empathetic. I wouldn't say that I'm an empath because I think a lot of people throw that term around, but certainly someone with good intentions, and found it hard that I wasn't able to have more of an impact, put it that way. But yeah, guys, I hope that helps you. Certain jobs I would just give a wide berth to. Like if you're going to, I would not do work like security. Nightclub security, no, not a chance. That's probably got to be up at the top of the list, to be honest, of things. The worst possible jobs that autistic people can do. I just think it'd be horrendous, Or if you're not a very self-confident person, stay away because you have to have a good sense of who you are and authority, you know. Otherwise, I think avoid at all costs. I just think it looks shit anyway, if I'm being honest. And doing night shift, like that's something else that we'll touch on. So when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, I did do night shifts and I got used to it. Um, there is something to consider, especially if you're working in clean rooms or areas like that. There's a lot of chemicals, so your sensory system is getting a fucking run for its money there. It's really getting a good old hit because you have to wear uncomfortable clothes, you're sweating, my goggles fog up, I sweat, I perspire a lot. Um, there's a lot of very toxic chemicals that are really smelly, like sporicide for getting rid of fungal spores and bacterial spores. IPA, so isopropyl alcohol cleaning agent. You have to spray stuff with that as well. And I understand, look, I get 100% why it's done. It makes sense to me. But there's a lot of really smelly, toxic chemicals you have to use. You have to wear three different layers. Yeah, your sensory system is getting a run for its money. I'm feeling claustrophobic even thinking back to it now. You get used to it somewhat, but I don't feel like you ever fully get used to it. I was going clean shaven when I worked there 100% because the masks you had to wear and you just wanted to be neat and tidy. I wouldn't have a big bushy beard, not sure allowed, you have to keep it a certain length. So your hygiene definitely improves. And you get to learn how bad some people's personal hygiene is. My God. But yeah, I think when we're given specification of a job, we will do it to the best of our ability. I can't speak on behalf of all autistic people because some are obviously, some will be lazy, some will be opinionated, they'll be entitled. No two individuals are the same, so I can't guarantee autistic employers are going to, or employees are going to be one way or the other. But I've always wanted to do the job to the best of my ability, and I've always wanted job satisfaction. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people aren't getting, not just autistic people. You're just going through the motions day after day, and I feel like I've got nothing else to kind of add to that. So I think I'll wrap it up there, guys. But let me know your experience down below, and what jobs would you avoid like the plague? Is retail a lot better than I'm making out, or am I just being overly dramatic? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next one. Just one I really wanted to make, so slán go fóill. Bye for now, guys.